In this video, we're going to go through and set up an Android virtual device, also known as an AVD, and that's an emulator which enables you to see Android apps sort of running in a window on your Windows computer. Now, just a quick note, I'm going to be talking about some software called Haxum, which we will be installing. And the thing is, that only works if your Windows computer has got an Intel CPU in it. And that's because that software, the Haxum, is developed by Intel. So don't worry, two things. Firstly, there's another alternative I'm going to be adding a video for called Genie Motion. But the other thing is you can still run this Android virtual device even if you haven't got an Intel CPU and even if you can't get the Haxum working. It's just that it'll be a little bit slower. So Haxum is a benefit. It's an advantage. If you can get it to work, great. If not, don't worry too much. Still use it without and it will still work. The first step we need to do is to download the Intel tool that's going to dramatically speed things up. So to do that, I'm going to go into my bundle folder, which you're probably familiar with now, and I'm going to download, or open I should say, the SDK manager. I'll let it just do a little bit of an update where it's downloading the latest versions or checking for the latest versions of everything. We're going to basically go down to the bottom. I'm going to deselect that because that's selected by default. And we want to install this one here, the Intel x86 Emulator Accelerator Haxum Installer. Click on that. As per normal, click on it and click on Accept License. Install. Now, unlike the other things we've done, this when it says install, it's really only downloading it. So it says that it's installed, but for all intensive purposes, it's only downloaded it. And where it's downloaded is if we go back to my root location where I put my files, go into my ADP bundle folder. This time I'm going to go into the SDK folder and then into the extras folder. There's now a new folder called Intel and there's a new subfolder, Hardware Accelerated Execution Manager. And essentially what's happened is it's been installed into that folder. So at this point we want to run this application. We click on yes because it's come from a trusted source. I'm quite happy to run it. Now the thing is, I'm running this Windows machine on an emulator. Now the reason that error's come up for me is because I've got a Mac and I'm running Windows in a window, if that makes sense. I'm running Windows on top of my Mac OS X software. If you've got a regular Windows computer, you'll be able to go through and install this software without any problems, and it will then automatically kick in the next section when we go to set up our Android virtual device. But we'll talk more about that shortly. So at this stage I'm going to click OK because I cannot literally install it. But again, you'll have no problems with that. And we'll go back up. And this time we want to go back into Eclipse. So into the Eclipse subfolder, start Eclipse, run it. Go OK, and this time we want to open the create a new Android virtual device. So to do that, click on Window and select Android Virtual Device Manager. I'll maximize that window. Now this is the area where we set up, no surprises, Android virtual devices. So to set one up, and this is again so you can run Android apps on your computer, you click on Device Definitions. You need to choose a device that you want to emulate. And a good one to choose is the Nexus 4. That's the one that I use and that seems to work quite well. But you aren't limited. You can choose literally whichever one you want. I think this Nexus 4 is a good one that works quite well. Click on Create AVD. It will come up with this screen. You can change the name to something else if you want. I normally just leave it on the default name. Target. Now you notice it's the two Android SDKs that we've downloaded in a previous video. I'm going to select Android 5.0, just the regular one. If you wanted to use the Google Maps and the extended functionality, you'd select this one. But when we get to that stage in the course of using the Google APIs, we'll be creating a separate Android virtual device. So don't worry about it. We can always do this again later. And it is really quite simple to create these things. Skin, I'm going to go with Skin with dynamic hardware controls. Now the other thing here is memory options. It's asking for how much memory to allocate to each one. Normally the default options are okay, You can have a bit of a play around with those, but I find that by default normally that they're okay. So I won't change any of those options. Now the only thing down here is if you did install the Intel Hacksum software, you would be wanting to definitely click this button. And by doing that, you'll get the full benefits of the dramatic speed increase by using that Intel tool, basically. But again, because I mentioned that I'm running on a virtual device, I'm running Windows over the top of the Mac OS X operating system, I can't do that, so I'm going to leave that off. And click OK. And that will then create the device. Okay, we've now created an Android virtual device. And at this stage, your next step would be to start it and click on Launch. Wipe user data is only useful if you've been messing around maybe in the Android virtual device. Perhaps you accidentally deleted something, or you've loaded a lot of apps and you just want to start from fresh again. That's a good option. That'll wipe it before it loads. Now, if I go to run this now, I will get an error. Now, the reason that I'm getting an error again is that I'm running a virtual device, and because we chose the Intel Atom x86, we need to have the Intel Hacksum software working properly. So I'm not going to be able to show you how that works, but what I'm going to do now is show you what it looks like on a Mac, just so you can see the speed of it and so on, and just see what it looks like. So I'm going to end this video here now, and I'll just add the last part of the Mac video showing you how it actually looks when you're running this Android virtual device on your computer. And it will look slightly different because you're running it on Windows, but essentially the concepts are going to be identical. So I hope that's all made sense and I haven't waffled on too much. Any questions, as always, leave a discussion. I'm quite happy to go through this for you in as much detail as necessary until it makes sense. So I'm going to start that now just to show you what it looks like, and then in a future video we'll actually start using it. Click on Start. Now, really, when the screen comes up, you don't really need to do anything. The only real thing to talk about is this wipe user data. Now, if you've been using an Android virtual device for a while and you've loaded a lot of programs on it, or maybe there's some sort of problem with it, by clicking on the wipe user data option, you can clean it out, effectively like reformatting it or taking it back to its default state. Normally I leave that unticked, and especially in this case, because this is the first time we've launched it, we don't need to do that. So I'm going to click on Launch. Now that's now starting the emulator, and what we want to look for on the screen is hopefully it'll come up with a message saying that the Hacks software has actually started. You can see down the bottom, you may have just caught that briefly, it said Hacks was loading, so that gives us a good indication. And you can see now loading on the screen, so I'll put that into the middle, we've got our Android virtual device, and that's effectively booting up now. And bearing in mind, this is the official Android 5 system image, if you like. This would be the same software that someone would have on their device. It's running on our computer, and you can see that it's booted up now. And for all intensive purposes, this is actually a real Android device. Now we can use it using our mouse. We can swipe. And we've got full access to just the regular Android functionality. We can click on here for a list of apps. Let's close that. It's coming up with some help because it's the first time we've used it. And we can just use our mouse to swipe left and right as we would normally do. So we've actually got a real device now here that we can actually use, and we can deploy our apps to this device for testing purposes. So you can see how this would be very handy for testing purposes, because you can actually leave it running on your computer, and as I'll show you in a future video, you'll be able to run the applications directly on this device. And pretty well the only other thing we need to talk about is how to close it down. And that's really quite easy. We just go over here to this little power button and hold it down, left mouse button down, and click on power off. If you just click it and let it go, it'll come up with a menu option, but because I held it down, it automatically shut down. So we'll leave that to shut down. Okay, so that's closed now. Now, the only other thing I want to point out here is now that we've created this device, you can create additional devices by going back here into device definitions again, and then choosing the appropriate device and clicking on create if you want to. But if we go back to the Android Virtual Devices tab, we can also delete this. So if you did find that there was a problem with the setup, or you got an option wrong, or for whatever reason it wasn't working, you can literally just click on that and you can click on delete, and you can delete it if you want. So you really can't do much damage here. It's just a matter of going through that process, and you've got yourself an Android virtual device. All right, let's move on to the next video.